So Colleen just did a post saying, every time we go through one of these storms with a different group that starts accusing us, usually about 30 channels or so at a time, the truth multiplies. And our vocabulary becomes more nuanced. And one of the reasons is because here's what God's done. And I've talked about this before, that God has always illustrated everything we're teaching with cartoon illustrations. And these people are the cartoons. In case you didn't get it while I was teaching about it, here they'll come along and illustrate it for you. And so, we said they would get angrier and angrier, and you would see them come out and just absolutely renounce the grace of God. Some of them renouncing Paul, some of them going so far as to start manifesting Hebrew Israelites type traits as they go back to Old Testament and go back to the law, which shows that they are not clear about justification at all. And as they, Jesus said, no man, you don't fix a garment by taking a patch of cloth off a new garment and sewing it on the old, because first of all, you damage the new garment, but number two, the old patch or the old garment with this shiny white new patch on it looks that much dirtier in comparison. And what he was talking about in context there, that's also the new wines, new wineskins parable in the same little passage. But what he was talking about is the Pharisees and John's disciples were offended that his disciples didn't fast and keep some of the traditions. And they're like, where does righteousness come from with your disciples? And what they were looking for was a teaching that would explain it, but they didn't want him. It's interesting that half of them were John's disciples. Why does John still have disciples? He told them to go see Jesus, but they're still following John and his teachings, and the reason is because they're tolerating a mixture of the old and new, and they don't see that the new is embodied in a person, Jesus Christ. He's the new garment and the new wine. And you have to become a new wineskin to contain the new wine. You must be born again to even relate to it. And also, you can't take a few teachings of Jesus and put them on your old works-righteous garment, which is soiled with sin anyway, and do anything but damage the teachings of Jesus and damage and exaggerate the defilement of your own garment. So that's what we have with the Galatian error, which is an incoherent mix of law and grace, where law is not given its proper place as a ministry of condemnation and death, but we're told that we must keep it, and by the Holy Spirit's help we may. And we're told, and grace is not given its proper place because we're still under law for rule of life. That kind of living is trying to fit the new wine in old wineskins. And what they do is they try to take some teachings from Jesus and some teachings from Paul and some teachings from Psalms and some teachings from James and some teaching from Deuteronomy and mix it all together. They take little patches of all these different teachings with no coherent actual interpretation of the scriptures in the light of the progressive revelation of the doctrine of Christ. They don't have that piece. That's what's missing. They just patch it all together as if it's all equally the same. And so what ends up happening is they've got a scarecrow garment with a couple little white patches, but the white patches, which should point to Christ, really just make their own garment look that much more defiled in comparison. So the more they double down on their mix of law and grace, somebody said on my wall, they absolutely adamantly stand for salvation by faith and that we're not under the law, while absolutely adamantly standing for the fact that we're under the law and we're under judgments. How can they? That's called the double-minded man, if you want to use James. But this double-mindedness and their thoroughly confused theology, all it does is exaggerate their sin. Remember, the motions of sin are by the law. And increase the offense. Remember, the law entered that the offense may abound. And increase the wrath. Remember that the law works wrath in the carnally minded, who are enmity with God and can't be subject to his law, which means they do not agree with its judgment. Well, they just get angrier and angrier and angrier. And you see people that everybody thought was righteous before start behaving shadier and shadier and mixing themselves with more and more evil crowds. You know, the mixed multitude at the trial of Jesus, where they said, "Give us Barabbas, we have no king but Caesar," was Sadducees, Pharisees, Zealots. You know, it was this mixed crowd of people who could not get along and would have nothing to do with each other, all crying out to renounce everything they pretended to fight for, because now their garment is completely exposed as being completely defiled, and Jesus did that. He said, now they have no cloak for their sin. And so then it became very clear, these people aren't for the kingdom. They don't love the things of God. They definitely don't agree with the words of the prophets. And it's the same way today. These people don't love the kingdom. They don't have any love for God. They don't love the brethren. They don't love the doctrine of Christ. They definitely don't understand or believe the words in the scripture that are plainly being taught. They just don't believe it. And meanwhile, the accusations just get worse and worse, and the evil works get worse and worse. And what I said a couple years ago was that you would eventually see Calvinists, Lordshippers, so-called free gracers, rapture watchers, and dreamers, hyper-dispensationalists, all come together. They will drop their differences and become one big angry mob, because what they all have in common is works. They're all works righteous at different levels. Some of them claim that righteousness is secured for the believer a little bit. They take a patch of it and stick it on their old law garment, but none of them will come out from under the law. And they will not put off the old man. They will not judge the flesh. They will not put on Christ. They will not put on the new wineskin. And so they don't have any new wine. All they have is the old wine, which is the vineyard of the earth, the vine of the earth, which produces fruit unto wrath. And its fruit is an abomination to God, and he's going to burn it. They are standing in Adam. They're standing with Adam. They're standing with the flesh, because they think the flesh versus the spirit is a matter of law keeping. No, the flesh versus the spirit is a matter of nourishment. And you would take the food out of the mouth of babes and stick it on the ground and stomp all over it. And that's really what they want to do, is take away the food. They can't refute our teachings except by lying about them. Everybody who's come to me from any of these groups and said they're doing railing videos about you has all said the same thing. And they obviously don't understand what you teach, or they're lying about it. And usually it's they're lying about it, and and it gets worse and worse. They completely mischaracterize literally everything you say, turn it upside down to make it sound like you said something else. And they put up these straw man arguments and here's the other thing. They have to use our language in order to try to refute our own teaching. So they're trying to say, well, he teaches if you hate your brother, you're not saved, and therefore he's backloading works into the gospel. No, where have they heard backloading works into the gospel? They wouldn't have heard it 5 years ago. Wouldn't have even known what that is. And again, no, that's not what I teach. I teach that the way of Cain is a refusal to recognize any of the brethren who are justified by faith. You hate them all. You hate the brethren because they have the testimony of Christ, and you reject God's testimony concerning his Son. In fact, it makes you angry. It makes you angry that God is the just and the justifier of ungodly people. And you are angry because you've been rejected, and inwardly you know it, because you tried to offer works. And instead of repenting of that, you hate the brethren. And you hate them with the hatred of Cain, which shows that you're of the wicked one. You're doubly fallen. You're twice plucked up by the roots, twice dead. Dead because of Adam's fall, but then dead because within full knowledge, with a full knowledge, you reject the testimony of Christ. You know the gospel, you know what it says, and you reject it and hate it, and it produces wrath in you, and you become angry and hate the saints. You're a murderer. You have committed, that's the sin unto death. That is what I teach. But again, they have to use our language, and this has always been the case, to try to circulate among our community and teach people who listen to us what's wrong with our teaching. And eventually they accuse us of teaching the very things that we renounce, that they wouldn't have even ever heard of before, because they're using our language. So it just shows that we are leading the conversation. We're not behind it. And we're these little tiny channels that these seminarian professional people are chasing around and exerting all this effort, and it's going to get, the word is just going to get clearer and clearer and clearer, because more and more people get set free. And, before it was like 3 of us channels, maybe 4. Now there's like 25, 30 channels, maybe. Some of them are little channels, all of them are little. And Paul's churches were little compared to Jerusalem. We have thousands upon thousands. Because the natural man, it's easy to get him in the work system. It's really hard to become spiritual and get on the meat of the word, which is not works and law keeping, but Christ as our food and drink. And that is the means, the source, the fountain, the new wine in the Christian life. And if you don't have that, you don't have a Christian life. Even if you're saved, you're just walking in the flesh and living in the flesh. And no, that doesn't mean God's going to punish you, but it means life's going to be really hard for you, and you're going to be a really frustrated person because you're in unbelief, and you're not enjoying the benefits of sons and heirs, and you're easy to be carried off as spoil by wolves. Until you grow in the knowledge of Christ, you're just a babe tossed by every wind of doctrine that comes through. But we've been teaching steadily the exact same thing for 6 years, 7 years now on the channel and the channels around us, and there's no winds of doctrine. We haven't changed our positions. We've just clarified them and clarified them and clarified them, so people are entering into them much easier and faster. Anyway, I just thought I'd comment on that. Take care.